Have you ever used your campaign?
For these, I need 500
Medyo
Hindi. Kaya it's for siya sa nature. Meron kami 5 units.
After all, we're not very.
Paano?
Alam mo, first motion. Hindi na mag-service pa yun.
Sa tao.
So, lalaro ka ba?
Okay, welcome to the third round of the crossfade. Car is the first cut. With a motion about lithium being put into the water supplies by the state to address eventual EG recession, and now on the Prime Minister with the motion.
Times of unhappiness, ladies and gentlemen, when suicide rates skyrocketed to 38,285 in just a single year, and then you have millions and millions of individuals staying at home, eating ice cream, watching Friends. We think that it's detrimental to the development of people in general, and more so in terms of developing ourselves to move past this particular situation. That's why, coming from our government side, we think that it's high time for states to put antidepressants in waters, ladies and gentlemen, to try to control the situation. A few clarifications for this debate. Firstly, what we mean by the antidepressants, ladies and gentlemen, what we mean by putting them in water systems is to put them in all water supplies, either public or private, to make sure that we maximize the effectivity of our policy. Now, what you have to realize is that this project will be clandestine, ladies and gentlemen, and no one will know that we are doing this. Thirdly, what we mean by minimal to no side effects, that these are antidepressants that are clinically tested, ladies and gentlemen, in such a way that is not harmful to the health of our citizens. Lastly, what we mean by antidepressants, ladies and gentlemen, they're not meant to be an offer, they're not drugs, right? They're merely to prevent depression, ladies and gentlemen. They're supposed to restore your condition to normal. Lastly, what we mean by kind of unhappiness, ladies and gentlemen, is persistent unhappiness, wherein the rates, there's a higher rate of suicide, ladies and gentlemen. Before I move on, yes.
If you want to restore the condition to normal, are you saying that anger is an abnormal feeling?
Well, let's debate that. Argue it if it's the same to depression. This debate is about depression, right? Now, let's go on to the first argument directly. We think that in times of recession, there's a necessity for state action, right? Because let's characterize a recession, right? Firstly, we think it's sudden because there's a degree of shock that comes to the recession, ladies and gentlemen, in such a way that, for example, even your identity when you lose your job, for example, as a factory worker or as a manager, ladies and gentlemen, is removed from you, right? Or even your financial needs in order for you to access all the things you want to buy, for example, is automatically lost to you in just a snap. And I think that this very sudden nature of recession is something that's harmful. But second, recessions are also unpredictable, ladies and gentlemen. You don't know when it's going to end. You don't even know if it's a recession or depression, ladies and gentlemen. And you don't know the value of its effects to you. But lastly and more importantly, that in times of recession, all your possible support systems in order to return your state to normal normal state. That's why these individuals enter a state of depression. And what it means, ladies and gentlemen, is when people are too unhappy to the point that it may lead to a lack of their productivity and even thoughts of suicide. What's crucial about depression, ladies and gentlemen, is that people who are depressed do not know that they are depressed, ladies and gentlemen, right? That's a very characteristic of there's already a psychological study that tells you, ladies and gentlemen, that depression is something that people do not know unless you tell it to them. Therefore, what are the harms when this depression comes into play, right? Firstly, at the worst case scenario, you go to desperate attempts, ladies and gentlemen, to escape from that particular scenario. That's reason why, for example, in the 2008 recession, there was actually a man, ladies and gentlemen, who killed his 3 children, who killed his wife, and afterwards killed himself. That's why we think that this particular form of depression does not just go to you, but it can also lead to other individuals and their loss of lives. But secondly, at the best case scenario, ladies and gentlemen, when you are depressed, we think that when you stop at home, ladies and gentlemen, and eat ice cream and you're not being productive, we think that this inaction of the individual leads to a continuation of the problem, right? And what it does is when you're not trying to contribute or not trying to fight for a next job, ladies and gentlemen, you actually hamper the ability of the country to move forward in terms of trying to go past that recession. That's why you increase the risk of depression, not only for yourself, but also for other individuals. The point of this argument is simple. Given that these individuals don't know that they are depressed and they enter these particular scenarios, we think that the state has to do something. Now, how is our policy effective in terms of solving it, right? No, please sit down. Firstly, we think that the very nature of antidepressants, ladies and gentlemen, they reduce your anxiety, right? And they return your mentality to normal. Firstly, it removes all the suicidal thoughts. That's the reason why on our side of the house, we better protect these individuals in terms of upholding their right to life. But secondly, we think that giving you go back to your normal instincts, ladies and gentlemen, despite the circumstances, your will to survive, ladies and gentlemen, will triumph, ladies and gentlemen. And what's going to happen is that you will try to find work, you will try to be productive, and you will try to move out of the rut that you are in. And we think that this improves productivity. Firstly, protects the rights of these persons, particularly the right, ladies and gentlemen, to their lives. But secondly, we think that their increased productivity and their will to survive is able to drive us out of the recession, ladies and gentlemen, because more people are trying to contribute in terms of moving past it. Now, secondly, we think that more importantly, on our side of the house, we don't rely on the depressed person, ladies and gentlemen, to move for himself. Because what you have to understand, ladies and gentlemen, is that these people will not move. Most likely, they will stay in their rut, ladies and gentlemen, and think that we have to take a step in that, right? Now, lastly, why do you think that this is a valid state intervention on the part of valid state intervention, right? Before I move on to the last point.
What's the value of your policy to people who are not depressed or suicidal?
Well, antidepressants do not have an effect for you because it just returns you to your normal state. So if you're at your normal state, ladies and gentlemen, you're gonna remain normal, so it's okay. At the very least, we target those individuals who are depressed, and at the very least, we don't assume that all of them are normal, right? At least we are effective on that one. Lastly, why do you think that life is the most important goal in this debate? Because we agree probably, we're going to infringe on your right to choose, ladies and gentlemen. There are 2 reasons why we think that why the state's intervention is necessary. Firstly, in terms of the centrality of rights, ladies and gentlemen, these depressed individuals, their right to life is of greater value because what you have to realize is that their choice at this particular point in the depression is not something that's valid to begin with because it's mainly concentrated on circumstances that push these individuals into that particular choice to commit suicide. That's the reason why we think that in terms of centrality of rights, the right to life has to be forwarded because we think that the right to life is the main enabler of all the other rights of these individuals. That's the reason why, for example, in terms of vaccines, we force it on individuals in times of urgency. But secondly, even the quantity of the rights that we infringe is irrelevant, ladies and gentlemen, in terms of upholding the right to life. Because what you have to understand, ladies and gentlemen, in this particular instance, this person, this choice to be depressed is something that is a risk not only for himself, but also for other individuals. That's why our policy upholds the more important value, which is the right to life of that individual, and it is only through our policy that we will be able to solve this problem. And with that, I'm very proud of this. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Now, Officer Shields.
In 2008, when the United States experienced a financial crisis because of the structural ineffectivity of the government, ladies and gentlemen, even the political instability that caused massive unhappiness and discontentment in Egypt and other Arab nations, ladies and gentlemen, even the ill-preparedness of the Philippine government for a storm surge that is Miranda, ladies and gentlemen, that caused massive discontentment within society. That's why we will never stand for the state creating an illusion of contentment to hide its ineffectivity and inefficiency in providing happiness. But secondly, we will defend in opposition that the state of discontentment of the masses can lead to genuine change, ladies and gentlemen, which directly responds to why the people are unhappy to begin with. That's why, coming from our side of the house, we think that if you want to target depression or manic depressive, then let's target them, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to subsidize antidepressants for those who are depressive, ladies and gentlemen, and members of this house. We will not have a blanket policy where you're going to introduce antidepressant which removes negative feelings and negative emotions from an individual. His anger against the government, his discontentment against the government. We will not stand for a blanket policy targeting everyone, removing them of their inability to be mad against the government, and will instead focus on those who truly need the antidepressants the most. Before I proceed to my case, let me respond for two things that don't quite fit in. First, she talked about it cripples the economy if people are depressed. But I asked the question, how many people commit suicide? Is it 50% of the entire economy that renders your entire economy impotent? The question, ladies and gentlemen, the impact of those who actually commit suicide, although it's very sad for them to do so, but I don't think it warrants a blanket policy, ladies and gentlemen. But secondly, if you're going to waste massive amounts of resources to purchase antidepressant and serve it to those who do not need it the most, then you're wasting resources given the fact we are in a recession. So I think that you have to take austerity measures and target only those who truly need it the most if we do not have money at the end of the day. But secondly, is productivity really the answer to a recession which was caused by your own government? We think it is structural reform. That's why Occupy Wall Street happened, ladies and gentlemen, when we went up against the state and demanded that it was an inefficient budgeting system that caused the global financial crisis. What is the point, ladies and gentlemen? And we will further defend this. Why? Only a state and a state of discontentment leads to a greater prosperity within the nation. The first argument is this: we create an illusion of contentment within society. In the vast majority of cases, massive unhappiness and discontentment are caused by the inability of the government to perform its duties well and make a happy society, such as the global financial crisis, even the corruption and state oppression being performed by their governments, right? Like the political oppression and corruption within Thailand right now, or the human rights violation in Middle Eastern countries. Now, what happens under government benches policy is you allow the government to monopolize the emotions of society and make them feel that nothing is wrong and that the government is efficient in its job in providing happiness, given the fact that there is no real happiness to begin with. Why is this actually dangerous? Because one, it immobilizes societal machineries that will go up against the state. Because antidepressant, it's true, it brings back to a normal emotion, right? So your negative emotions like anger, for example, against the government and discontentment are actually removed. Which leads me to my second case, that the state of discontentment among the masses can lead to genuine change. Before I talk about this, sir.
Okay, assuming that is true, do I have to be absolutely angry just so I can demand for change? Why can I simply be optimistic and desire to eat so that I'm not?
Yeah, but the problem is we already neutralize and lower the probability of going against the government that we are actually against. Now, the feeling of discontentment, ladies and gentlemen, exposes the failures of the state, right? When we occupy Wall Street, when people protested in the Arab Spring, ladies and gentlemen, because happiness and the state of having genuine happiness lies in the heart of every person, lies in the heart of every man. What is the point? if you place them in a constant state of unhappiness, the natural reaction of that individual is obviously to go against the cause of his unhappiness. If he sees that it is the government, then obviously they go up against the government. Because it's not true that in every case of unhappiness, everyone does not cooperate with government policy. Because when that happened, you saw a nationwide unity instead of actually vindicating the government, ladies and gentlemen. What is the point? The masses aren't stupid enough to always pinpoint all the wrongdoings against the government. They know the instances wherein these particular scenarios are caused by government inefficiency, such as the economy, for example, ladies and gentlemen. And those are the particular instances wherein we do not want to make the people feel that there is nothing wrong with their own government. What happens in our policy? Firstly, we do not remove, and in fact, we even protect the natural mechanism of your masses to go up against the government. Because if you imagine under their model, if you allow, for example, Robert Mugabe to do this, then obviously the people of Zimbabwe will be perfectly fine. Or if you allow Hosni Mubarak to have done this before the Arab Spring, then the Arab Spring would have not happened, given the fact that you already neutralized the emotions of your people, lessening the probability of them going up against the state. But thirdly, we think the state must protect the bodily autonomy of every individual state. Because I can see that if there is a great necessity here now, in order, if there is autonomy, then we introduce, we include your bodily autonomy if you need it the most. That's why we provide vaccines for those who are sick. But we do not force individuals who do not need that medication, ladies and gentlemen. If you're not manic depressive or not suffering from depression, why is it legitimate under your model for us to intrude your bodily autonomy and kill off all your emotions just because I assume that you are actually depressed? Now, in summation, what do we stand for in government and opposition bench? We think, as much as we want to protect the suicide victims, we think we're going to do that under our model. Obviously, there would be reports of who are manic depressive from the families, and even the families themselves would seek out government assistance to protect their loved ones who are actually depressed. But what we do not agree with is we create a blanket policy that might affect dissidents, ladies and gentlemen, oppositions to the government against genuine policy change. That's why, if you want genuine change, and if you want to protect the natural mechanism that the masses has against the government, you have to side with opposition bench.
Take the leader of the opposition, Deputy Prime Minister, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, it was in the United States where Jacobson versus Massachusetts decided that every single person had the duty to take a vaccination shot. Even if, ladies and gentlemen, that this one person feared that this drug, for example, may cause some sort of harm, it was later proven in the case that because that harm was so infinitesimal that to the point that it's not even considered or scientifically sound, that it is okay for us to mandate these kind of things. Ladies and gentlemen, we think that the failure of opposition to engage us on the principled level of this debate already merits their favor. Merits their favor, rather. Even if assuming the case of opposition to be true, that there are, for example, alternatives in place, it is still okay and principally correct for us to do so, even given their alternatives. And at best, what the opposition has a value-neutral one. But then they gave out this alternative. They said, oh, we'll subsidize it. Ladies and gentlemen, because they subsidize it, they agree in principle that antidepressants are effective in curbing a specific problem that we particularly want. Therefore, that's no longer the debate. The debate now is the extent of which we have to make sure that they have to get those antidepressants. Now, this is where they said, well, people will tell other people that if they have family members that are depressed, they're going to go there. First of all, ladies and gentlemen, of course not everyone in the United States keeps in touch with his family, or even has a family. Most likely, if you're single and you're working, sometimes you separate from your family to live in your own apartment, which is exactly why it's much more dangerous to live by yourself, which is exactly one of the main causes of suicide, ladies and gentlemen. Secondly, even if you are part of a family unit, that doesn't mean that they're going to ask every single day, are you okay? Do you think you feel like committing suicide now? Of course not. Most likely, especially towards other people who are depressed, they will think that there is a problem, so everything all that they will say is, is nothing is wrong, even if clearly to themselves they are that kind of risk. Unpredictability, ladies and gentlemen, especially towards these states. Now, this is the case from opposition, as I understand it. There's a harm towards monopolizing the emotions of people because they can be angry at government, which leads to us being unable to solve a particular situation because there is no public sentiment for actual change. Firstly, ladies and gentlemen, this argument does not fit in this debate because never did they say why anger is tantamount to depression. Especially, ladies and gentlemen, you characterize very beautifully that depression is a specific, not just an emotion, but an actual medical condition. It's not even that. It is an extreme form of sorrow that puts your mental state in such a way that even if you feel sorrow of a normal person, you don't necessarily see that it's depressed. But secondly, ladies and gentlemen, he's talking about anger, which is still not nuanced in the particular debate. Secondly, ladies and gentlemen, we tell you that you don't even have to be angry in order to fight for the kind of changes that you particularly want. If I was Mother Robert Mugabe and I had a chemical into the water supply, for example, I will still be angry, not just depressed. If people are being killed and I see it, of course I will still rally for it. If there is a visible sign for it, I will fight for that particular kind of change. But thirdly, ladies and gentlemen, if you are depressed, do you even have the energy to go about the actual changes that you particularly want? Because if you are depressed, the tendency, as we told you, is you only stay at home. You don't care about other people anyway. You're not saying, hey, it's all organized, it's all good. Go to Washington and fight for our rights. No. They feel so constricted that you just stay at home, do nothing, and wait for the inevitable end where they have to pull the trigger. In every instance, ladies and gentlemen, we think it is harmful. And the failure of opposition to specifically say and address on a principled level the hearts of my partner is disgusting. And we're moving on, yes. Your responses are irrelevant because we are treating those who are experiencing manic depression. You're not responding to our debate. Why don't you extend it to everyone? Okay, as we told you, because that's the only particular way that we're making sure, ladies and gentlemen, that it does get to particular people. Because even if they're depressed, they'll most likely drink water. Of course, ladies and gentlemen. But let's assume their case. It's not just in times of recession. Even every person has the duty to live in a normal state, and the state, ladies and gentlemen, the government must enforce it. Every person, we agree, has different states of mind, even if you characterize very clearly that this is a medical condition. However, some of those changes in your state are usually harmful. You can be drunk, you can be depressed, you can be high, and especially since the state right now institutes mechanisms to make sure that we don't do that. Like, for example, driving drunk, for example, we make sure when you are, for example, in that particular normal state. Ladies and gentlemen, this means that if your secondary directed choice is dependent on actual actions, sometimes these people don't even necessarily know if they are in a different state as when they have normally made that particular decision. So people can voluntarily, and this is exactly why people voluntarily give their rights to the government to foresee that in the future, they know that they will not make perfect decisions. Because even us know that we are in fact fallible. Sometimes we don't know that we're depressed. Sometimes even, especially debaters, don't even know that we're burned out. Which is exactly why we see our authority voluntarily as part of living in a democratic society, especially in the United States. Which is exactly why, if you're going to complain about it in the future, you can't necessarily trust yourself. Not just towards saying that, this is what I particularly want, or I want to make the decision of staying home right now. How will you know, ladies and gentlemen, if that is the correct decision? Because right now, the external circumstance is that an influence of recession, massive spikes of sadness that necessarily makes and assaults you to make sure that you are in a different state. So at the very least, there is doubt as to what kind of state of mind every single person in that society has. But the conclusion is, how do you make sure as a government that you are still making your decisions, quote unquote, as a Western liberal democracy, if you are necessarily free? The only way, therefore, that we make sure that you don't have those particular kinds of inclinations, if you are in a normal state, is if the government provides the policy for us. And this is not just all the freaking time. We agree that it must be used in extraneous circumstances, which is exactly why in times of recession, where it has been proven to increase suicide rates, where it has proven to increase depression, that is where we are particularly giving this policy to. In order to proceed, and even if the opposition wants to protect the normal individual choices of every single person, they cannot claim to protect that because even they are not sure that these people are necessarily quote-unquote free. But you told me quite beautifully, ladies and gentlemen, that even the person's central right to freedom, a central right to life, ladies and gentlemen, if even one person's life is at risk, it is very well worth that every single person is given the duty or has the duty to be able to make sure that that doesn't particularly happen. And then, ladies and gentlemen, even opposition can't mitigate the fact that we save at least one more life given our policy. It may be because through antidepressants, but we feel it's still effective in saving at least one more life.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister, Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Here, here. Ladies and gentlemen, the greatest way to affect change is to respect the explosion of emotions inside the state, especially in the context of depression. Because it is only when we recognize that there are a lot of emotional outbursts that the state will always be afraid of its people's discontent. And it will leave no room for bodily manipulation, which is the gateway to all other manipulation. Before we go on to the arguments, I want to clarify a few things. Because the debate has been really messy because of the characterization coming from affirmative image. I don't know what the goal of the debate is from their side. Is it to reduce suicide rates, return to normalcy, get out of depression, or get out of the state of unhappiness? Because if that's the goal, then getting out of suicide rates isn't the goal. Actually, the way to go. Nike says we have to return to normalcy, but there was no characterization of what the normal emotions are supposed to be in the context of recession and in the context of depression. As a person, Mr. Speaker, how am I reasonably expected to act? How am I reasonably expected to feel? And why do they have a defense on the government having a monopoly on telling people what should you do and how should you feel, especially that we're talking about a basic good that will leave you completely powerless to even tell the government, I don't want it to begin with. The second thing is this badly characterized idea of depression and suicide, being suicidal. She says, they don't know they're depressed. We disagree. The fact that you already said that recession spikes up suicidal cases by 38,000 in a year already assumes that the government knows that that will happen in the end. The fact that you already know that they're inside their room, eating ice cream, watching friends, drinking, posting a status on Facebook that says, hi, that already means that that person has the tendency to be depressed, and that already assumes that red flags will be there. And we don't buy the characterization coming from Brian. What about fully independent metropolitan individuals in New York? The fact that your family is outside and you know that that person already lost a job and he will be homeless for the next 3 months raises a red flag for the family to even say, how are you? Are you feeling okay? Do you have suicidal tendencies? Do you want to go back to the garage? We think, ladies and gentlemen, that if your problem then is the suicidal tendency of people, especially in the light of recession, the debate becomes, do you want to generalize the entire population or do you want to have a targeted response? That's why Carl's questions were valid, because in the context of recession and unhappiness and very scarce resources, why do you put something that is so going to be costly for the national population to a basic good to control their emotions, ladies and gentlemen? The main difference between our debate is that we say we recognize that suicide rates can be a problem, but our policy is more targeted because it requires government to understand your problem better and to actively look for the potential suicide victims. You don't do that to your model, and you're not defending why, even to people who aren't depressed and suicidal, you still are willing to include bodily autonomy. Let's go on then to the first case of today's debate, and that is the right to conscience of people. And why do people have the right to conscience, especially in the context of unhappiness? Yes, ma'am.
The problem is, your policy is very dependent on people opting into that subsidized antidepressant, right? So in the end, are you still going to solve the problem? But if you're going to force it out, aren't you also including bodily autonomy?
Yeah, we agree it's opting in, right? But this is also where support systems are there. And it's also the current mechanism of governments because there's no perfect policy. But the hearts are braver on your side because of the things that we've already discussed. Let's go on to the analysis of the right of conscience. And let's assume that happiness is the goal, according to them, ladies and gentlemen. Government says that we have to return to normal emotions. I don't think that happiness is a normal emotion in the light of recession. Second of all, if they say that they don't know why they're depressed, we think that it's irrelevant to know whether you're depressed or not, because what's relevant is you know why there is a possibility for depression. And that is massive government failure. Carla already talked about discontentment is what makes you afraid. But let's go on to the characterization of how is a person like when he's on antidepressants, right? First of all, there's an emotional war inside your body. Antidepressants make you fuzzy and floaty. For example, the effect of a normal antidepressant is to lower down the cortisol level so that your body, even if it's tired and it wants to rest, you wouldn't feel the stress. Or you want to increase the melatonin level so that you can sleep. So on the level of productivity, I don't think that even happens on your side because you will have a massive amount of people experiencing like the jiggly puff once. But second of all, the danger is the body adapts to it. And that's the reason why if you look at the most depressing cases of antidepressant abuse and substance abuse, it's because the body adapts and you have to increasingly attack things and get antidepressants. What's the harm in this, ladies and gentlemen? First of all, you're creating bodily manipulation on their side already. Anger, ladies and gentlemen, is a normal response in recession. Let's assume that depression will lead to happiness. Anger then will lead to your inability to feel anger as well because you're lowering down the emotional thresholds, ladies and gentlemen. This is the same reason why China was able to crack down on a lot of dissidents because they used laughing gases, ladies and gentlemen, and members of the South. That's even a harm, and we don't think that the government has the right to do that. But lastly, ladies and gentlemen, we think that whenever you're happy, we will agree with you, you decide differently. The judgment is even clouded as well. That's the reason why our friend, we think, ladies and gentlemen, that the judgment is clouded. It's the feeling of uncomfortability and guilt that makes you the right thing sometimes. So, if you have to analyze the choice versus the actions, then we're willing to concede that anger will blind you, but there are three conclusions to the argument. First of all, people have the right to demand based on discontent. Secondly, it leads to greater negotiation and leads to better government response, especially that they already conceded you don't know when the recession will end, so you don't know when the policy will end as well. But lastly, we think that autonomy leads to accountability as well. That's the reason why in vaccines, you tell them that they have to take it because there's no autonomy in that. Anyone can be a carrier. But in depression and suicide, you don't know how it can affect other people as well. But lastly, we think that the second argument is that it's going to be prone to abuse. If what's the goal of the debate? Happiness, ladies and gentlemen, but happiness cannot be monopolized by the state. As a matter of fact, it's when people are discontented that you create more legislative reforms. What is the state supposed to do in your model? How do they like to react? We think that the policy gives the states time to not do anything and to assume that people will suddenly wake up one day, not feeling depressed anymore, and not going to act for their rights. We don't think, ladies and gentlemen, that political pressure is going to happen, especially in the light of recession that led to Occupy Wall Street. We want you to be depressed. We want you to take suicides if possible, because it's that suicide that scandalizes the event and pressures the state to respond. No, as the line.
Deeply skeptical of the opposition and government with peace.
to answer this the way it is, what is the problem and how do we address it? So, there were three critical things that opposition said. First is, what about normal people? Second, it's far too costly. Third, let's just target the ones who are really sad. The first one is quite a bit of selective characterizations. Because as far as we can say, Mr. Speaker, but we cannot really say in this debate which ones are normal and which ones are not normal. Why is that so? Remember, the characterization of this debate specifically focuses on the time of a recession. There's a moral decay that exists within that country. You may be employed now, but you're only counting the seconds of when you're going to call you in the office and say, oh God, you're also fired. But the second degree, some people might even say and be optimistic that I can be employed the next day, but it doesn't really happen. The truth is, Mr. Speaker, that normal people, in the line between normal people and not so normal people, is only a matter of seconds in which they become depressed. Therefore, we have, in this case, I have to assume that most of them, if not all, are really depressed. And this is where our characterization does exist, Mr. Speaker. We told you that these individuals cannot really identify when they are depressed. No one chooses, for example, to listen to an emo song and decide, for today, I'm depressed, for tomorrow, I'm happy. No one does that. The situation that we cannot control decides for them to be depressed. That's why these people do not know if they're even depressed. The only response that we have is that, well, your family members can tell you, and the state can use the NSA so that they can raise red flags, so that when you say, hi, probably it's a sign of depression. First of all, the characterization of minority tells you that even your own friends, your support structures, are the same ones who got fired along with you. That's why if you're going to draw any sort of string out of there, there's nothing there of also depression. But to the second level, if you're insisting that the families will be able to intrude upon your life, tell you to drink this drug, isn't that a contradiction as well? That there is no bodily autonomy that exists, because the only time that they can really say and target those people who are really sick, if they will force upon their throats these particular pills. Unless they're willing to do that, they're also willing to let these people die. And that's something we cannot stand for, because government was explicit that this debate was not really about happiness, it's about saving lives. Because that's the most objective thing that we have to do in this debate. Then they move on, sit down, to the second idea. The second idea was it's too expensive. But Mr. Speaker, everything that we do in a recession is too expensive. Everything that we do is a gamble. Even the bailout was 700 billion. We didn't know if it's going to resuscitate the economy. But we have to do that because we have an objective good of maybe getting back to our feet. This is one of the mere policies that we do so that possibly we can get back to our feet as well. That's exactly what, Mr. Speaker, all the argumentations specifically targeting these people does not work, because people do not choose the circumstances when they become depressed. But finally, there was this late attack from Jason that, there was abuse. I don't think this counts within the debate, because the debate assumes there's minimal to no effect for these particular drugs, because that's why we think that abuse does not necessarily happen. Second, so therefore, we think the problem solution is I do not think that it's best to go with government policy. Therefore, the second question then becomes, which is their constructed concept. How do we then deal if the problem is truly about government inefficiencies? The three things that they said is, number one, anger, you eliminate anger, but anger is also useful for you to incite change. The first thing that got wrong with this debate is that if you don't take antidepressants, your ability to become angry does not exist. We think that's a simple factual wrong in this particular debate. We think depression is a different emotion, from your anger. But I don't want to get stuck in this anger battle. Therefore, let's just play the emotions part. We think if you can't get angry, you can also desire change by saying, maybe I want to survive tomorrow if you're living in Mugabe's life. Maybe I want to get a job tomorrow because I don't want to continue living without having to eat anything. Those are all positive things that push people to say, let's do something about those particular problems. But thirdly, it also assumes that just because people are angry, automatically there's a positive change. In fact, Occupy Wall Street is one of the most recent failures in terms of the social movement. They didn't have any sort of leadership. They didn't have any sort of goals because people are too angry to even define what they are all about. Sometimes what we need in social movements are calm people who are willing to think and expand their lobbying, calm people who are willing to recruit constant members, not the ones who are just really angry because they hate the idea that they're part of the 99%, even if structural changes are what we truly need. But on the second level, this whole characterization simply assumes that the only change that happens is on the ground. We think change happens top down as well. Because remember, we exist in a democracy. For example, the Obama administration took the particular opportunity to rally the people and having the idea of hope for the better. Therefore, they have a positive campaign that it will change the landscape between the Republican ideas. And people were energized by that very campaign. That's what led all of the Democratic votes and even the electoral changes to happen. Yes?
Number one, you're building. Second of all, if anger is still going to be felt even with antidepressants, then the non-suicidal tendencies cannot be addressed because the suicidal tendencies aren't exclusive to depression.
No, I'm rebutting. Number two, just because I'm angry with you does not mean I will kill you. I'm just angry with you. Let's now move on to the final question. Therefore, since we were already able to settle that in terms of the effectiveness, there are other things that people can do. What should the state do in this time? Because at best, Mr. Speaker, we can only gamble in this particular side of the House because they said that, we're going to use lives so that it scandalizes states, right? So that it can encourage our movement. But number one, that goes against state principles of protecting lives. Number two, that assumes that when people become depressed and have themselves, it was for the 1% and the 10%. People do it at home privately, so it doesn't scandalize their movements even further. In that case, what is the only objective good that we can have in this debate? Not the gamble of the social movement to suddenly impact work. Because never did they tell you that angry people suddenly will change governments. What's the objective good is that if these people live and can have one hope, so that maybe in the long run they can start building their resources and the networks so that they can change the government if that's truly the problem. But maybe they're also the ones who just have one hope so that the time when it's not really the government's problem and the structural reforms happen and they get their jobs back, at least they didn't die. Because remember, they never responded to all of our argumentation regarding how life is the most objective good, that even their autonomy, for example, is even questioned when you have preventive medicine, and a good example would be about polio. So autonomy in that case is something the state does not even respect, because we think this is only one of the choices that you make. But without life, you cannot even make those critical choices in the first place. That's why life is the most important good that we should pursue. Thank you.
Opposition.
Yeah.
Mr. Speaker, the major reason why Team Affirmative will lose today's debate is that he refused to respond to our point on autonomy. The only defense that he had was an example of the vaccines, for example. Why do we allow that, ladies and gentlemen? Something which Jason has already mentioned to you. The reason why, the only instance we allow it if there's a clear and present danger to everybody within society. They've never shown to us that suicidal depression is something which can spread to everybody, ladies and gentlemen. That's the reason why we do not think that's particularly a good enough example to show that there is that we can change the economy. But we're going to move on to economy eventually, the latter part of my speech. Let me move on to the two important issues in today's debate. The overarching issue is it really justified for the states to impose their policy and impose the rights of autonomy and conscience of the individuals? The first issue is about, is the suicide rates enough reason for us to do that? And the second one is, let's talk about, is the usurpation of democratic frameworks for checks and balances enough a reason for you not to do it? This is generally the case of the executive branch. The first one, is the suicide rate enough reason? Because we talked about the idea that alternatives do exist, that we can actually administer to individuals, those people who only need it. The response coming from that is that, well, firstly, some people don't really have families. The question is, how many are these people exactly? Are they isolated instances? Because what you're doing simply is that you want to sacrifice everyone's civil liberties such as the defense against state, for the sake of a very narrow sector within society. Those people who are actually, not just those people who are depressed, but just those people who do not want to opt in their particular model of actually going to a particular psychologist. But secondly, how do we really solve the problem, ladies and gentlemen, right? Because we think that an individual also has a responsibility to take care of himself, of the person of himself. A person, for example, seeking for treatment. The way in which you address these depression is not for them to just drink, ladies and gentlemen, because there are underlying causes to their particular depressions, and your drinking, ladies and gentlemen, wouldn't solve it. So at the end of the recession, for example, when you no longer supply these water, ladies and gentlemen, therefore their depression will still be there. It's in a case-to-case basis. That's the reason why you have to opt in a particular program, right? You need actual professional help, an actual program which includes post-treatment support system, which is not present in their policy. Well, we say that's something which we have in our policy, but what we have, ladies and gentlemen, which makes our policy mutually exclusive, is that if you have your policy, people will not seek our treatment anymore, these treatment anymore, because of the complacency. They think that you'll be lulled to complacency, that, well, drinking water will be enough, you don't have to get out anymore and opt in and seek for actual professional help. Something which they never really addressed in today's debate. Why would your water just end the depression if it's so deep, they're already in the rut to begin with? But even if, ladies and gentlemen, even if, for example, some people will die, ladies and gentlemen, we think that the overwhelming harm to liberty and rights as a defense against a state which has been the number one murderer in the world, like Mugabe, for example, and even the United States, which has a historical record of human rights abuses, we think does not justify your suicide rates to actually strip us of our right to autonomy and conscience. How are we going to then really stand up between autonomy as well as their defense or protection of these suicidals? We say, let's take a look at the second issue and individual rights, Mr. Chair. Something which I never refused. We told you, ladies and gentlemen, to have examples as a deadlock breaker, you have to look at current jurisprudence and policies in the US and what do they actually appreciate in this. You don't force people who don't opt in if they're going to die to begin with. Secondly, you don't criminalize people who repudiate treatment for cancer in order to protect these lives. You don't, for example, make Jehovah's Witnesses not have blood transfusion because you do believe that the person has bodily autonomy, ladies and gentlemen. The reason why, and that's also the reason why you don't ban fat or in burgers, even if it's the highest reason why people do die, ladies and gentlemen. Because autonomy is the idea of freedom from state intrusion, because it's only the individual who knows what's best for himself. That's something which you're supposed to respect, ladies and gentlemen, at the end of the day, for several reasons. One of which is the fact that the state has no monopoly over absolute truth, and the state could never tell you that probably drinking water is the best option than actually seeking for psychological help, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Speaker. But more than that, because the state also has a record of abusing, ladies and gentlemen, abusing people whenever it decides for you, that's the reason why it's always within the domain of that particular individual. But yes.
Let's compare real harms. In our side, you have suicidal people, and their side, the next day, you still don't have a job. But this is our life. But we doubt
Firstly, that's completely artificial because you're also saving these people's lives, and it's more targeted, ladies and gentlemen, because at least we're giving them actual professional help. The only thing that they're giving is water. The little, not the example how their deeply rooted depression will be addressed with that water. So I was simply consenting and counseling. Let's move on to the second issue, which they really refuse to respond to: the usurpation of democratic faith for checks and balances. Carl talked about the idea of illusion of consentment, which he brought upon by an artificial high. For example, the antidepressants values. They never really specified what's depression, antidepressant, or probably neutralize these emotions. It's the anger or discontentment which provides the pressure for structural change. For example, in the 2008 crisis, it's the people's depression which made people to seek for bailouts. That they said, well, we need calm people. Yeah, you need calm people eventually, but you need those smart people to initiate it to begin with. How did the calm people initiate it, ladies and gentlemen, members of the debate? Something which we never really argued in today's debate. But a false response coming from them is that, well, they will not do anything if they're very depressed. Firstly, if they're very, very depressed, then they should get treatment, right? Actual psychological help. But secondly, some people are not clinically depressed, but only angry. You're likely to act if you're frustrated than if you're happy, because happiness is equals satisfaction, right? And if you're satisfied, you'll go to complacency.
You want status quo to continue, because you're satisfied anyway, and you're happy. Then there's a really cheap attack coming from government. The anti-depression is that equal to not feeling angry rather. You're not addressing unhappiness. The motion talked about unhappiness, ladies and gentlemen. And unhappiness is a component of anger, ladies and gentlemen. So you're taking away anger as well, ladies and gentlemen, in their particular policy. But most likely, but more importantly, Mr. Speaker, it's only in instances of discomfort, right? And instances of feeling of guilt that you're removing, ladies and gentlemen. When you feel like doing the right thing, ladies and gentlemen, it's something that you do not want to take away from these individuals. Lastly, Jason talked about the idea that it's difficult for you to hold politicians accountable because satisfaction is key to election. And what happens is that the government has a monopoly to control people's satisfaction in order for them to perpetuate power. What is the response coming from our forbidden bench with that particular response? There was nothing. That's the reason why it's rather clear we should win today's debate. Thank you very much.
May round for Papatian and Lily.
Yes.
So, 7. Sabihin ko 7. Upper.
I would summarize government's case line in 3 sentences. Number 1, you are depressed, therefore you are suicidal. Number 2, you are suicidal, drink water. Number 3, problem solved. And according to them, that's the only debate. And that's highly, highly sad in today's debate because they never really took a look at the extents and what government policies are supposed to do. In fact, when the motion says state of unhappiness and you want to create antidepressant, they had to look at the converse of unhappiness, which is happiness, and how do people react in a state of happiness as well. The first reason why they're going to lose this debate is their inability to accommodate different frameworks in today's debate. Let's assume that the policy is so effective that you bring depression to stability. I don't know, whatever that means according to them. In that instance, then you will bring anger to what? Happiness, contentment, apathy, inability to go and rally against the government because you are in an illusory state of mind that nothing is wrong. But the second speaker, who seemed to be the whip in the debate, tried to push it with the burden. She said, well, they can still feel angry. Like, that can even affect change according to them. So by logical extension, they can, in depression, they can still feel the pain that the recession led to. They can still feel the pain that the loved one have forwarded in today's debate. And government's incapacity to respond to the institutional failures is what led them to that depression at the end of the day. Do not believe them when they tell you that you don't know why you're depressed. You know precisely the reason why. Because tomorrow, you don't have a job already, the economy is failing, your loved ones are going to suffer, and you had a lot of debts. It's largely rooted to a problem and a market failure that your government that wants you to become happy will solve at this point in time. So they laugh at us in using Zimbabwe and China. But the reason why there was a space for that is because they never contextualized how rational the state is as an actor in their side. So if you have a state monopoly already, and that's the reason why there's always a high threshold for monopoly of the state, especially in economic decisions, largely also for bodily decisions, is because the state is not able to be trusted at this point in time, ladies and gentlemen. There was no defense coming from them on why do you suddenly transfer your right to feel at this point, especially when there was no defense of how are these people really reacting in status quo. Because there are two probable scenarios. First, they can't think properly, and second of all, they can still think properly, right? In our model, those people who can't think properly are even in a greater disadvantage because the state is controlling and deciding for them at that point in time. But you also have to respond to a blanket policy such as yours to even affect people who don't want to be a part of the policy to begin with. People who will drink water because according to you, it's a basic need that everyone will go to. But we said, we agree, there is a problem of depression, but that depression is largely tied back to government incapacity and a structural non-reformation systems. That's why we said, we're gonna go and spend our funds looking for the people who are depressed. But that doesn't mean that people don't have the right to rally against the government. They don't have the right to feel angry. They don't have the right to feel depressed, bordering suicidal, because it's the government that led them to that emotion. There was no response, secondly, to the heart of the debate, ladies and gentlemen, and to the hearts that we forwarded. I heavily characterized how antidepressants work. No speaker coming from government bench even talked about what the antidepressants effect to the body is. So we think, ladies and gentlemen, that even opens a lot of floodgates for government incapacity and government abuses. In the end, we will agree with them. Suicide is a problem, but also suicide is what scandalizes the problem, and it actually is the birth of a movement, even if they say it's disorganized, even if they say that they probably cannot succeed at this point in time. We think the fact that you're scandalizing the problem and you have the right to demand against a government that is unable to protect you is already a value in itself. Let's all be unhappy because that is what makes us rational. Thank you.
Not reply.
If there's just one sentence to summarize the case coming opposition, maybe you would call it family. Maybe you would maybe the state would turn so homicidal and start killing everyone. Maybe I can be not depressed, but if a gun is pointed to me, I'll just stand there, freeze like a deer. No, ladies and gentlemen, of course not. All of the harms that we've talking about have been statistically proven. Even coming from my people specifically, that in terms of weighing the actual harms that could particularly happen, the response was, this could happen, that could happen, but in terms of what actually will happen and what is sure to happen, we think they had no response to that. But what is the goal of the debate that even that government opposition rather wants to set up? They said it was first solving the recession and then preventing a massacre. But never did they say why anger, ladies and gentlemen, would actually lead to policy decision that actually leads us out of the depression. Because at most this proves is that we will have a popular decision. A popular decision is not necessarily the best decision, but never did they also prove as to why, after given our characterization of depression would be, that they would actually do something about it. Because if you are depressed, you are not likely to rally out in the streets. If you are depressed, you're not likely to do all of the things that opposition necessarily talk about, ladies and gentlemen. So, in terms of solving the actual problems and the variety of problems in place, we think that we come out ahead. But then they actually agree to antidepressants. If they are going to say, well, water won't solve it, but they're also agreeing to the principle that that antidepressant in the water is even effective. In fact, what would they do if they go to a doctor? The doctor would say, oh, take an antidepressant, it'll solve you, it'll solve the problem. That's what's likely the doctor is going to do. But how are they even going to do it? Are you just going to skim through your Facebook? This guy had a sad smiley face. He's depressed. Or that guy thinks that another person is sad. Then he's depressed. No, they claim that it's targeted, but in the end, it's as much of a blunt instrument because you're not relying on experts, because even those experts rely on the common man. And as we all know, doctors, it takes a doctor to actually clinically diagnose a depression. Now, is everyone a doctor? No! That's why specifically the only possible way and we can make sure that the person is safe and doesn't result to any rash action is through our specific policy. But then they say suicide is okay if it actually pressures the government to particularly act. This is disgusting because even that assumes that pressure is actually going to make the government do something particularly good. But even we told you that we cannot sacrifice individual rights for some possible benefit in the future, that the government will actually do something. Because if you look at their analysis carefully, all that they've been doing is arguing by example. Zero analysis whatsoever as to what the incentive of government is inherently to actually do all of those particular things. Because if we're just the United States that just cares about killing its people, then we're not going to have any debate at all, because the public interest is not what we told and talked to you about, which is saving lives of people who are prone to suicide. Even if that debate happens in the future, like a drug, for example, that may curb anger, all those other emotions, we think that that's a debate set in the future and not the one that we're having right now. But they are also not accounting for the possibility that you can have a mixture of emotions. I can be depressed and angry at the same time. In the same way, I can be in a normal state, not sad, but also be angry. In the same way, I can be happy and angry at the same time. Something good happened to me, but I'm angry at that guy just because he happened to be walking by and I hate his guts. All of those things are possible in the end, ladies and gentlemen. And in the end, these people who are prone to the types of depression that we specifically talk about have the same lives that we set out to be. In the end as well, when you're talking about what could happen, ladies and gentlemen, it is clear that you have to err on the caution, on the tangible harms that we already pointed out to you. Zero analysis coming from opposition on the likelihood of those things happening. Even if that was the case, we think that we actually do prove it from the change.